Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. Ryan and I had been married for 5 years. 5 years of shared laughter, quiet moments, and the occasional storm that every relationship weathers. We were like any other couple, flawed, human, and trying our best to make it work. Our love was real, but it wasn't perfect. We had our highs where the world seemed to revolve around us, and our lows where silence stretched between us like an unbridgeable chasm. That night, the storm hit harder than ever before. It started as a trivial disagreement, something about finances, or maybe it was about how little time we were spending together. I can't even remember now. What I do remember is the way Ryan's voice rose, sharp and cutting, and how my own words tumbled out in a desperate attempt to be heard. The argument escalated, each of us throwing words like daggers, until finally Ryan stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. The sound of the door reverberated through the house, leaving me standing in the living room, my heart pounding and my hands trembling. I sank onto the couch, clutching a throw pillow to my chest, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. The silence was deafening, and I felt utterly alone. Chapter 2. The Knock at the Door. I don't know how long I sat there, lost in my thoughts before I heard the knock. At first I thought it was Ryan returning, ready to apologize or maybe to continue the fight. But when I opened the door, it wasn't Ryan standing there. It was James. James was Ryan's best friend, a man I had known almost as long as I had known Ryan. He was tall, with kind eyes and a smile that could light up a room. He had always been there for both of us, a constant presence in our lives. But tonight, there was no smile on his face, only concern. "I heard you guys fighting," he said softly, his voice tinged with worry. "I was driving by and saw Ryan leave. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I tried to brush it off, to tell him it was nothing, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I stepped aside and let him in. He followed me into the living room, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "You shouldn't be alone right now," he said, his voice gentle as he sat down on the couch beside me. I offered him a drink, more out of habit than anything else, and we sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the evening pressing down on us. Eventually, the silence gave way to conversation. We talked about everything and nothing, our lives, our dreams, our fears. James was a good listener, and I found myself opening up to him in ways I never had before. Chapter 3. The Line Crossed. As the night wore on, the conversation grew more intimate. I found myself confiding in James about my struggles with Ryan, how I felt like we were growing apart, how I sometimes wondered if we were still in love. James listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine, and when I finished, he reached out and took my hand in his. "I know you love Ryan," he said, his voice low and soothing, "but you deserve to be happy. You deserve to feel loved." His words struck a chord deep within me, and I felt a surge of emotion, guilt, desire, and something else I couldn't quite name. I wanted to pull away, to tell him that this was wrong, but I couldn't. Instead, I leaned in closer, and before I knew it, our lips met in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. The kiss deepened, and I could feel James's hands roaming over my body, igniting a fire within me that I hadn't felt in years. I wanted him, and I knew that he wanted me. We stumbled upstairs to the bedroom, our bodies entwined, our breaths heavy with desire. What followed was a blur of passion and longing, a moment of weakness that would change everything. When it was over, I lay there, trying to catch my breath, a wave of guilt washing over me. What had I done? I had cheated on my husband with his best friend. I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Chapter 4. The morning after. The next morning, I woke up to the harsh reality of what I had done. James was still asleep beside me, his arm draped over my waist. I carefully slipped out of bed, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what to do next. I knew I had to tell Ryan the truth. I owed him that much, but the thought of facing him filled me with dread. I dressed quickly and went downstairs, my hands trembling as I made a pot of coffee. When James came down a little while later, he looked at me with a mixture of concern and guilt. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft. I shook my head, unable to speak. I didn't know how to put into words the turmoil I was feeling. "I'm so sorry," he said, wrapping his arms around me. I never wanted to hurt either of you. I let him hold me, finding a small measure of comfort in his embrace. This wasn't your fault, I said, pulling away from him. I should have been stronger. I should have resisted. James looked into my eyes, his expression full of sorrow. You can't blame yourself for what happened, he said. You were vulnerable, and I took advantage of that. I shook my head, tears rolling down my cheeks. I don't know what to do, I said, my voice breaking. James pulled me close again, his arms holding me tightly. We'll figure this out together, he said, his voice soft and soothing. Chapter 5. The Confession. Later that day, I sat down with Ryan and told him everything. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. His face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally heartbreak. You slept with James? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I'm so sorry, I said, reaching for his hand. I never meant to hurt you. Ryan pulled away from me, his expression hard and cold. How could you do this to me? He asked, his voice breaking. I thought we were a team. I thought we were in this together. I tried to explain, to tell him that it was a moment of weakness, that I had never intended for it to happen, but Ryan wouldn't listen. I can't believe you would betray me like this, he said, his eyes full of rage. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. In the days that followed, I moved out of the house, leaving behind the life I had built with Ryan. It was a painful and difficult process, but I knew it was necessary. I threw myself into work, trying to keep my mind off the pain and guilt I felt. I avoided seeing my friends, knowing that they would ask questions I didn't want to answer. Then one day I got a call from Ryan. He wanted to meet, to talk. I agreed, my heart pounding as I drove to the park where we had agreed to meet. When I saw him sitting on the bench, my heart ached with regret and longing. Why did you do this to me? He asked, his voice trembling with emotion. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words to explain. I was lonely, I said, my voice shaking. I felt like you didn't love me anymore. Ryan looked at me, his expression full of hurt. So you turned to my best friend? He asked, disbelief in his voice. I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. I know it was wrong, I said. I know that I hurt you, and I'm so sorry. Ryan shook his head, his expression dark. You don't know how much you hurt me, he said. You betrayed me. You broke my trust. Chapter 7. The Road to Redemption. The conversation with Ryan left me feeling more lost than ever. I knew that I had made a huge mistake, that I had hurt the man I loved, and I knew that I would have to live with that pain for the rest of my life. But I also knew that I had to try to make things right. In the weeks and months that followed, I worked on myself, on understanding why I had made the choices I had, on learning to forgive myself, and on becoming a better person. It wasn't easy, and there were many days when I felt like giving up. But I kept going, driven by the hope that one day I might be able to rebuild what I had broken. Chapter 8. A New Beginning. The road to redemption is long and fraught with challenges, but it is a journey worth taking. As I stood at the crossroads of my life, I knew that I had a choice: to let my mistakes define me or to learn from them and grow. I chose the latter, and in doing so, I found a new sense of purpose and a renewed hope for the future. The story of Ryan, James, and me is not a simple one. It is a story of love and betrayal, of pain and forgiveness, and ultimately of redemption. It is a story that reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there is always a glimmer of light, a chance to start anew.